In this session, we're going to take a look at what sleep deprivation actually is, because it's a term thrown around more often than not. When someone gets a bad night's sleep, they will say they are sleep deprived, but that's not strictly true, because sleep deprivation actually occurs when you consistently get less sleep than what your body needs to function. So one night of having poor sleep, I wouldn't say that you are sleep deprived. I would say that you do have a sleep debt, though, that you do need to pay off. And it doesn't just make you tired, it causes a system failure across the body. So we've talked about the brain and the body and how important that recovery element is, but we now actually need to take a look at what specifically happens in terms of metabolism, in terms of performance, and other areas caused by sleep deprivation. So number one is, in terms of your metabolism, you actually have worse blood sugar. So your body struggles to process carbohydrates due to lower insulin sensitivity. So the pancreas is what produces insulin. And of course, we need to make sure that our little workers inside of the pancreas are working efficiently. Our little worker in this case is going to be insulin. However, if you are sleep deprived, you are likely to be more insulin resistant. That means insulin is not going to work as best as it should. Therefore, when you do ingest carbohydrates, insulin is not going to shuttle those carbohydrates as efficiently inside of our cells. So instead, that glucose will stay in the blood. It has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear like a magic trick. Abracadabra, you wave your wand, it disappears. It can be stored as glycogen in the liver and in the muscle. Too much glycogen, then it starts to dip into our fat cells. But I think the main one here is actually a hunger spike. So in our last session, we talked about two hormones, ghrelin and leptin. More about ghrelin, which is a hangry hunger hormone, and leptin is a fullness hormone. Essentially what happens is leptin, it drops and ghrelin starts to rise. So that's where you crave like junk food and you start to eat more calories or more food compared to what you'd usually eat. And it's because the body is deprived of energy. You are running on a low battery life. Therefore, you need to regulate those hormones by getting a good sleep so that you don't crave those sugary refined carbohydrates. Number two, performance and still, poor cardio. Your heart and lungs have to work harder for the same result. Why? Because they didn't get the recovery that they needed either. If you think your heart is working passively 24/7, 365 days a year, same as your lungs, right? But obviously, in terms of your lungs, for every breath, it's probably around 5 to 8 seconds. It has a little bit of a break, right? But it's still inhaling oxygen and you're expelling carbon dioxide. Loss of coordination, so your mind-muscle connection and your ability to learn new movements starts to fade. So it's not just the fact that you're getting older. When we are younger, manual dexterity is significantly better just because your body is starting to learn new motor patterns. But once we've become accustomed to those motor patterns, it really comes down to mind-muscle connection as well as relearning those movements. Your ability to learn new movements becomes a little bit harder because if you're not able to maintain the old ones, well, guess what? Your ability to learn the new ones, it's lower. Number three, hormones and immunity. You're going to lose muscle. It's as simple as that. If you are in a calorie deficit and you are trying to lose some body fat, you will lose muscle. Regardless of how hard you train, you will lose muscle. Because your levels of growth hormone and testosterone drop significantly. So it's not just about your nutrition, it's not just about your training, it's not about the supplements, it's your sleep. Fix that and everything else gets 10 times better and you'll have a better physique and you will operate at a high level. If you get sick, your body produces fewer antibodies. Think of antibodies as codes for vaccinations, or keys, shall we say. They're almost like a T shape. And what they do is they actually target viruses and infections. So when you are in good health and we are exposed to bacterial or viral infections, these antibodies come along and it's called a major histocompatibility, 1 and 2, by the way. Just think there's like different shaped keys, okay, and these keys come along and they pretty much bind to bacterial and viral infections and they code that information and they go, yeah, we've we've coded it, and we can actually help defend you against these sort of bacterial and viral infections. But when you have poor sleep, our little workers, our antibodies, they don't work as well. Therefore, when they're trying to code that information and they put the key inside the lock, they miss a few things. That is why you continue to get sick, because it's not efficient at coding that information. Go and have a look at it. I might just drop it into one of the areas, MHC1 and MHC2, major histocompatibility 1 and 2. It's very, very interesting. It's almost like a lock and key mechanism. Brain and mood. You have mental burnout. You are irritable. You're less motivated. Every task feels super hard. Even just getting up and doing your washing. The increased perception of effort is 10 times harder. And it's because you haven't gone through that recovery element and the energy your brain and your body needs. So, if we actually take a look at the categories, we've got injuries, we've got overtraining, we've got muscle growth, we've got body comp, and we've got the off season. Now let's take a look at the impact of sleep and how it affects those specific categories. So in terms of injury, you're going to have more frequent injuries because, again, your tissues, your muscles, they're not recovering, they're not repairing, and significantly slower healing times. We have something called von Willebrand factor. Think of this as like a special glue. Whenever you cut yourself, you sort of see that healing mechanism occur, right? We have that layer which sits over the top of the cut, and it's a scab. And that's where we have something called platelet adhesion. And platelets pretty much come together from white blood cells. And we then have von Willebrand factor. And that helps the healing process. It's a special glue, and the stab becomes quite hard and thick. And that's to protect and keep inside any of the infection so it doesn't spread. If you have poor sleep, guess what? It takes 10 times longer. So make sure you get your sleep. If you're overtraining, you have a high risk of burnout or systemic overtraining syndrome. We need to make sure it's the Goldilocks and the bear analogy. Too hot, too cold, just right. We need a good amount of training as well as a good amount of sleep to perform. 5 nights of half sleep equals decreased muscle protein synthesis. So guess what? You're catabolic. You are no longer building muscle. If you're dieting, you've got increased muscle loss and decreased fat loss. So it doesn't matter if you drop your calories more. It doesn't matter if you start to do more cardio or more steps or train harder, more volume. That's not the easy fix here. The easy fix is your sleep. And in the off season, you get less muscle gain and higher fat gain. So it's incredibly important to understand that sleep is literally your foundation for these areas, regardless of how hard you work. If you're not sleeping well, you will not become a high performer. So look at optimal sleep durations. Jack, how many hours should I be sleeping? All comes down to your circadian rhythm, to be honest. There are guys that sleep 4 hours a night and they have incredible quality of sleep and they can function. There are guys that sleep 12 hours a night and they wake up the next day absolutely knackered, tired, lethargic, fatigued. If I was to give you a range for recreational individuals, we want to aim to 7 to 8 hours per night. If you're advanced, 8 to 10 hours to handle higher training demands. But we also want to think of sleep as a U-shaped health curve, meaning both extremes carry risk. So if you're sleeping too much, you're not exposing your body to that natural stress element. Therefore, it's always going to be in a recovery state. If you're sleeping too little and you're exposing it to high levels of stress, well, it's going to be under-recovered. So too little sleep, less than 78 hours, is linked to high risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, high blood pressure. For every 1 hour of sleep that you lose, your mortality risk increases by roughly 6%. That's death. So make sure you sleep well. Too much sleep, constantly oversleeping, increases drowsiness, increases fatigue. Remember, you're still in that recovery state. Your body can't transition out of that. And surprisingly, it also is associated with high levels of cardiovascular disease and an increase in your overall mortality risk.
I like the way you kiss me, I can tell you miss me.